Wyatt made his way across the hallways of the Noir Navio, ignoring the puzzled and curious stares of those he ran past in favor of reaching his destination. A quick question to the shipboard AI pointed him in the right direction, eventually coming to a halt before a door guarded by two auxilia personnel. Guards, to be precise, given their uniforms. As he approached, the two guards holding basic combat shotguns exchanged a quick glance before saluting him. The lieutenant let out a huff of air as he came to a halt before them. "I need to use the elevator," said the pilot. "Sir?" the guards replied in unison, stepping aside to grant him entrance. Wyatt stepped closer before a red light scanned his face in the blink of an eye. "Authentication verified," a monotone voice announced softly. A few seconds later, the doors opened as the red light above the doors turned green. As expected, Wyatt found a staff member inside the large elevator's cabin. "Where do you wish to go, Lord?" the man asked, in an obedient tone that reflected respect and submissiveness. "It makes my skin crawl whenever someone calls me Lord," Wyatt thought with disdain before pushing that aside to focus on his task. Stepping inside the cabin, the doors closed and he turned to the man. "Take me to Deck 3. "At once, Lord," the man replied before pushing a few buttons on a console next to him. With a barely perceptible start, the elevator began to move down. "I still can't comprehend why it doesn't feel like it's moving," Wyatt commented, glancing around the cabin. He'd rarely used elevators back in the academy, or when inside any given station he'd been assigned to in the past, but the experience was the same. A jerk of motion followed by either a sense of added weight or floatiness, depending if you were going up or down. "Forgive me, Lord, for I do not understand it either. I'm merely an attendant and general operator," the man apologized a moment later. "I wasn't blaming you, and please, you don't need to call me Lord all the time. My rank is enough. I would prefer that," Wyatt said sincerely. For some reason, that only made the man more nervous. "Of course, Lieutenant," the man said and turned his attention back to the console. Internally, Wyatt sighed. Ever since the prince promoted him to the rank of lieutenant, he had practically cut ties with the rest of the commoner personnel aboard first the Exalted Virtue, and now on the Noir Navio. It wasn't his choice to make, but there was nothing he could do about it either. Less so now that he was a noble. His life had been completely flipped over, and while he was starting to find his footing again, it wasn't an easy process by any means. Although he would be hard-pressed to deny he enjoyed some of the perks that came with his rank and now his position as a knight banneret. Better food, a comfortable bed, a private shower, and more than 2 uniforms. But most of all, and despite the hurdles along the way, he enjoyed the time he spent with Cynthia and Clara, be it at their service or in private. The thought of his friends made his lips curl into a tiny smile a few moments before he felt that same, barely perceptible motion that indicated the elevator had come to a halt. Confirming his assumption, the doors opened a second later. Stepping out, another 2 guards saluted him as he walked past them. He tried to ignore their stares, but he couldn't. Not this time. He didn't know them, they didn't know him, but he was a commoner at heart still. He could feel their gazes piercing the back of his skull, envy, jealousy, resentment, fear, apprehension, disdain, desire, and more. He couldn't blame them. Not entirely, anyway. He had never been interested in trying to gain the favor of a noble or become one before. A significant portion of commoners, though, sought to achieve it with feverish intent. Bunkmates talking with each other, imagining scenarios where a noble would take them under their protection or fall in love with one, was a common point of interest. The showers were no better, nor was mealtime. Half the time, it seemed, was spent in doing their work, and the other half trying to gain favor in one way or another, skill, looks, abilities, submissiveness, and more. Usually, though, commoners preferred one of 2 routes: sexual favors or showering a noble with praise and acclaim. The former was simply pointless in his opinion. If a noble wished to engage in such things with a commoner, an order was all it took. Depending on the noble, that was either a strike of good luck or a harrowing experience. In Volantis, it happened, though nobles, even those from lesser houses, viewed themselves as superior, for they were in standing and by the sheer virtue of being insufferable blue-blood idiots and wouldn't sully themselves with mere commoner stock. But bastard children coming from noble lineages were a thing after all. Back in the academy, it was far from uncommon to hear rumors about such things happening. It rarely ended well, though he did hear about a lucky sod that was taken in by the lady that took a liking to him. Most of the time, though, such matters were solved behind closed doors. Thankfully, pregnancies and STDs were prevented thanks to inoculations, allowing intercourse to happen on a regulated basis. The second method was by far the most preferred by overreaching commoners. Most nobles were easy to please with praise, adoration, and doing everything they ordered. He never got involved in those problems. His reputation as submissive but lacking in assertiveness protected him well. In the academy, nobles formed groups and factions, usually with a crowd of commoners following them closely, trying to be the favorite of any given blue blood. Fake words and praise, all aimed to stroke the flames of their already bloated egos. Or as Mr. Warlow explained it to him, by employing the ancient art of kissing a truly monumental amount of ass. The memory of the old man who taught him how to paint and who never held his opinions to himself made him smile. He wasn't part of his family, but he respected the old man and was thankful to him for everything he'd done. Whilst he was afraid of how the old man's opinion of him would change when he learned of his ennoblement, he wished to do something nice for him. It would cost him nothing. He had more than enough credits to spare now. Chuckling to himself as he made a mental note to ask his parents to get something useful for Mr. Warlow, Wyatt felt his mind at ease once more. Instead of breaking into a run, he walked faster through the hallways, partially amazed that the quality of materials and architecture remained the same across the entirety of the ship. Usually, the layout of principality ships was designed in such a way that the living areas for nobles, the main deck, and the engine and core rooms were the most secure, best armored, and best built. The remaining areas suffered a significant dip in quality since they weren't as important. Whoever built the Noir Navio and the other black ships thought otherwise. It took him a few more minutes of silent walking until he reached his destination, the main shield control room. To his surprise, Lupin Lusanto, technician-in-chief, was present in the room. He was flanked by 3 assistants while a dozen technicians and 4 engineers carried on their duties. Only the 2 guards posted outside the room greeted him with a salute. Apparently, that was enough for the red-eyed man to notice his arrival. Giving the datapad he was reading to one of his assistants, the man approached him. "Lieutenant Staples, I was not informed that you were coming," he said with a posh tone. "Is there anything I can help you with? I assure you everything is working at peak efficiency. Her Majesty will not find my efforts wanting." Wyatt resisted the urge to raise an eyebrow, managing in turn to raise his left hand apologetically. "I'm not here under any sort of official business or command given to me by either Her Majesty or Commander Redford, Technician-in-Chief. I'm here in search of Jincho. The AI told me he was currently operating in this area." "Ah, yes, one of the Yakanti," Lupin said, crossing his arms. "Since you are here for, I presume, personal matters, may I ask why is it that you need him? Has he done something to offend you?" "Nothing like that," Wyatt was quick to reply. "There's something I wish to ask him, but if he's unavailable, I can come back later." "Nonsense, Lieutenant. He may not be human, but he is serving under a military contract. For all intents and purposes, he's equal to commoner, which is to say, a regular member of the crew, and thus he will answer your call," Lupin replied with a gracious smile. Wyatt nodded. Even though he knew Lupin wanted to say something worse, he chose the diplomatic alternative for fear of offending him and his commoner origin. "I see. Then where is he?" "Down there," Lupin replied, and one of his assistants pointed at a floor panel at the other side of the room, in between 2 large consoles currently unoccupied. "He's performing minor stability tests. Nothing vital. I shall summon him immediately." The black-haired man shook his head. "No need. I'll talk to him personally, unless my presence obstructs carrying your duties, Technician-in-Chief." "I was about to leave and continue the supervision of non-critical areas," Lupin replied, his voice never losing the edge of elegance and blatant superiority he carried himself with. "Your presence won't interfere with the work of my engineers and technicians, but please, if you wish to talk with the Ikanti, do so in one of the lounges." Wyatt nodded. "I will. Thank you, Technician-in-Chief." Lupin merely nodded once and left the room, followed closely by his assistants. With pleasantries done, Wyatt spared only a glance at the red-eyed man before moving to the indicated section. He found the Akanti wearing a makeshift uniform as he tinkered inside the small hole. For a regular-sized human, it would be a tight squeeze and either force the use of some sort of drone or a remotely controlled mechanical tool to perform repairs and tests. But for the smaller Akanti, the limited space was barely an inconvenience. "Wormbrain?" Jincho asked, surprised, without turning his head around to face Wyatt. His right third eye moved instead, focusing on the pilot while he continued to tap at a rectangular device. Wyatt remained on that spot, clearly visible to the Akanti's vision. Treating with other Akantis before had taught him how their range of vision worked. Unlike many others, he didn't find their biology to be weird or eerie. Odd and strange? Sure. But they were aliens. He knew from experience that the Akantis found humans to be just as strange compared to them. "Hello, Jincho," he greeted, feeling the tension and annoyance Lupin created to fall down, leaving behind a much more natural experience. "Are you busy?" "Not much. Finishing running tests on capacitor response time and fluctuating algorithms. Standard stress tests, nothing hard, just boring. Very boring. Less boring now with you here, maniac," Jincho declared eagerly. "I'll be done in a moment. You need something for your fighter? You need to take it to real action and test it first before I can make wonderful alterations." "I'll be sure to keep that in mind," Wyatt replied, smirking. "In truth, something occurred to me and I wanted to ask an expert on the subject. That is, if you know how FTL jumps work." Jincho let out a short-lived screech that the translator failed to interpret as anything more than a choked "Ha! Let me finish, then we talk, Wormbrain." Wyatt waited patiently, stepping back to avoid pressuring the technician. His wait ended a few minutes later when Jincho jumped out of the compartment, stored his device, and quickly put the panel on, securing it with the use of a small rotating screwdriver. Come, maniac," said the small alien as he walked past the pilot and out of the control room. After a short walk to a nearby lounge area, the Akanti flopped on a bench, his legs dangling a few centimeters above ground. "You interested in technology?" he asked all of a sudden whilst patting the spot next to him. Wyatt sat next to the Akanti, shaking his head. "I know how to use what I need, but I'm no technician, not even a mechanic. I can't fix anything if it breaks or stops working correctly." "Hey, Wormbrain," Jincho teased. "What you want to know?" The lieutenant paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts and putting them in order before speaking. "I have a problem I need to solve, but I don't know how to. I thought that asking you would help me find a solution since you are the smartest Akanti I know and the best technician, too." His words were honest, though the flattering intent was there. If there was one thing he'd learned about Jincho, it was that praising his skills and intellect worked wonderfully. It also helped that, unlike many nobles who demanded respect, awe, and praise for not forgetting how to breathe, Jincho only desired recognition of his work. Jincho's feathers stirred for a moment, taking in the praise with open arms. "Go on." "I need to jump into a system, but every lane ends up with the same result. The enemy will detect my arrival due to the warp bubble breaking." "Is there any way to minimize the warp entry?" Wyatt asked as nonchalantly as he could manage. "Wormbrain, how do you think FTL jumps work?" Jincho asked, all 6 eyes blinking in confusion. "You tell the AI where you want to go, the drive activates, and then you're there a few moments later?" Wyatt replied, shrugging. "I know you first need to be far away from the influence of large celestial bodies and be close to a lane before the jump can happen." "You're not wrong, Wormbrain, but you're not right either," Jincho replied, scratching his neck for a few seconds before continuing. "First of all, what you call lanes don't exist." Wyatt blinked in surprise. "That can't be. I've used lanes all the time back when I was a compost hauler." "I know. The hierarchy has them too, but lanes don't really exist," Jincho said, bringing up both 6-fingered hands and raising his index fingers. "There isn't anything connecting star systems together. We're all just floating and drifting through space where gravity tosses us around like seeds on a basket. A lane only exists thanks to how the jumps work." Wyatt listened intently, soaking in the new information while his brain painted a broad picture of what Jincho was saying. The warp drive or blink drive, or however you want to call it, works in 2 ways. First, inside a system it makes a small bubble around any ship equipped with a drive. This way, we can accelerate and decelerate faster and easier than any conventional ship. It can't fling us instantly, and it can't halt the ship abruptly. Otherwise, we'd be stains across the walls. Jincho chuckled. The drive only smooths the laws of physics to make sublight travel more comfortable and steady for us squishy organics. But to make FTL jump, simple rules follow. You want to exit a system as quickly as possible and enter another as close to the gravitic influence of the local star as possible. Wyatt hummed. To save fuel and shorten travel time? Jincho nodded quickly several times. Yes. Lanes are what we call the shortest route between two systems. But jump points don't exist either. Everywhere outside the gravitic influence of a star and other large bodies like dense rocky planets and gas giants can be a jump point and an exit point. FTL jumps are tricky. The Akanti moved his fingers closer together. When making a jump, you're not twisting space-time, wormbrain. You're opening a tunnel to a hyperluminical dimensional space where the laws of our universe can be ignored for a brief moment. That's what allows FTL jumps to be possible, but how to do it is the hard part. Tearing open space is the easy part? Wyatt asked, incredulous. Tearing open space? Gods no. I said that the drives don't twist space-time. Nothing can travel faster than light due to relativity and time dilation. A tear would just create micro-black holes and end up with the ship exploding or worse. Pay attention, wormbrain! Jincho exclaimed, shaking his head. Sorry, I'm not an engineer or a technician, Wyatt excused himself. I know. Not many can be as smart as me, Jincho proclaimed without arrogance but full of pride. Where was I? Ah, yes, the jumps. See, maniac, to make jumps you can't just look at the place you want to go and hop around like a fish out of water. You have to take time dilation and the speed of light into consideration. Just look outside the window. The stars in the sky you're seeing are far, far away. They may not be even there anymore. To make a proper jump, you need to consider distance, movement, space-time dilation, and the amount of power the drive is going to use before you set the coordinates for the exit point. I can barely understand what he's saying, but it sounds as if a jump can be as short or as long as I want in open space, Wyatt reasoned, crossing his arms. In that case, entering a system can be done from any direction. Precisely, wormbrain. In the space between stars, only distance and gravitic influence how far you can go. It is rare, but some jumps are cut short thanks to rogue planets or undiscovered black holes, but the latter can be easily spotted with gravimetric sensors and proper telescopes, said the Akanti. But that doesn't solve the problem. Upon exit, the warp bubble ruptures and the signature will be picked up by almost every sensor and station in that system, Wyatt repeated, frowning. Then all you need to do is exit outside the detection range of the sensors, Jincho answered instantly. That can be done? Wyatt asked, baffled. That's what navigational AIs are for. Making the calculations and pinpointing exit coordinates would take days without them. The AIs have safeguards against tampering, but Principality security is not very good, Jincho replied, feathers shaking for a moment. It can be dangerous, but only slightly more than a normal lane jump and exit point. The problem is travel time. It could add 1 or 2 extra days of sublight travel into the system. And you know this how? Wyatt asked with a raised eyebrow. How do you think me and my fellows left the hierarchy? Jincho replied with a tone of smugness. Wyatt was sure that if he could, Jincho would be smiling from ear to ear. Would that prevent any potential enemies from detecting our arrival? Jincho nodded, lowering his hands. Pretty much. A ship exiting FTL is like a rock tossed into a lake. It creates ripples that are easy to detect by anyone nearby. But those outside the range can't see it. The ripples also cease quickly and the water returns to normal. The universe is like a tasty Nalak worm that wriggles when you poke it but calms down quickly. You won't be detected unless there's a deep space station nearby. Wyatt smiled broadly as a fire spread from his stomach to the rest of his body, filling him with satisfaction and hope. Jincho, I think you've opened a path we can use. I have what now? Jincho asked, confused as he blinked each set of eyes one at a time. The lieutenant stood up. Come with me. There's someone that needs to hear this. A quick notification sent by the AI told Redford that Wyatt Staples plus another crew member were outside the war room requesting entry. Redford made a quick note that Wyatt still had 20 minutes to spare before he was supposed to report back to him. Intrigued by what had made his second-in-command report earlier, and with company no less, he ordered the AI to open the doors. An eyebrow was quick to rise when he saw the lieutenant flanked by a Yikanti. "Lieutenant Staples, you're early and with company. If you needed to report something to me, you could have done so through the communications AI. Apologies, Commander Redford, but I believe this is a matter too delicate to not speak it in person," Wyatt replied, inviting Jincho to step into the room. Once inside, the doors closed and the two sat down, much to Redford's surprise at the lack of manners the Yikanti put on display. It took him a moment after to realize that the Yikanti in question was the rambunctious Jincho. Stifling a sigh, he turned to Wyatt. "I believe this must be important?" he asked seriously. "It related to our upcoming campaign, Commander," Wyatt replied, leaving no room for doubt. The aged commander's eyes widened for a moment, then he leaned back on his seat. "Explain." "I believe Jincho should be the one explaining it. I barely understood it myself," Wyatt replied before pinching his chin for a couple of seconds. "Actually, Commander Redford, would it be possible for the princess to be present too? I believe she'll need to hear this." Redford stared at Wyatt with a blank expression for several moments in utter incredulity before letting out a heavy sigh. "You want to summon a princess at your behest?" Wyatt nodded. "She needs to hear this eventually. Why not now?" came his simple reply. "Wyatt Staples, you will be the death of me." Redford shook his head but couldn't stop a small smile from forming across his lips, closing his eyes for a few seconds. "She will be here shortly. Wyatt, how much does he know?" "Nothing. I presented the issue as a personal problem, Commander," replied the pilot. "Am I missing something important?" Jincho asked, unafraid and more than a little excited. "What you are about to hear cannot leave this room, Technician Jincho," Redford declared in a serious tone. "Do so, and you shall be censored and punished severely before being thrown out of the nearest airlock. Am I understood?" "Crystal," Jincho replied, giddily. "No need to worry, Commander. I can keep my beak shut tightly, most of the time." "For your sake, make that be all the time, or I shall shut it permanently myself," Redford warned, but the Yikanti seemed unfazed by the threat of violence. A few minutes of uncomfortable silence later, the door opened to allow Clara entry into the room, followed closely by Cynthia. "You desperately need the Dacus implant, Wyatt. Your incapability to connect to any network is proving to be detrimental to two-way communications," Clara jested in good humor as her eyes landed on Jincho, who in turn waved a friendly hand at her. Giggling at the gesture, she imitated it. "Jincho is your name, if I recall?" "The little rascal that hacked our communicators," Cynthia added, staring silently at the alien. Jincho stared Cynthia back for several seconds, then turned to Wyatt. "She wants to eat me." Wyatt had to bite down his tongue to stop him from snorting a laugh. Clara was not so courteous, choosing instead to cover her mouth to hide her smile as she softly laughed. For her part, Cynthia stared at Jincho in disbelief, flabbergasted by his suggestion. It only lasted a moment before the blue-haired woman protested. "I do not wish to eat you, Yikanti," she declared sternly. No, you do. I can see it in your eyes. The hunger to catch me, crush me, too bad for you, so sad. Yikanti meat tastes awful to humans. Not much to be found either way," Jincho announced, touching his chest with one hand. "As humorous as this is," Redford interjected after clearing his throat, "we have more important matters to attend to. You may sate your curiosity later, Cynthia," jabbed the aged commander. Cynthia crossed her arms, glaring daggers at the older man. "Wyatt, if you will," Redford ordered. The pilot took a deep breath, calming himself. "Of course, Commander. Jincho, could you tell them what you told me?" Jincho nodded and began to speak. The conversation proceeded almost identically as it had gone with Wyatt. By the end of it, Redford was silent and in deep thought while Clara was outwardly calm and collected, but Wyatt suspected that she was formulating plans and schemes with the newly available information. "Could be done, Redford?" Clara asked after a few moments of silence. "Such tactics. I wasn't aware something like that could be done in such a manner. But Jincho is correct. The Arabians employ similar assaults into our space, and it would explain how some pirate assaults have caught entire stations by surprise in the past." Bringing up the map and the systems surrounding Hastrung, he crossed his arms. Our pursuers will expect us to launch our assault from Kaltashi, Benstrung, or Jilo. You could enter from that system over there, Jinsho interjected, pointing at a system that was 10 light-years away from Hastrung. HD-19 P-Cal. Hastang? Redford read. It's a brown dwarf. It doesn't even have planets or asteroid belts. It's an empty system with only a comm buoy that's replaced every few decades. You'd entered from the top of the Hastrung system. You can exit inside the interior limits of Hastrung's Kalzak Vale and remain undetectable, Jinsho explained. Exiting in the interior edge of the system's Oort cloud would be disastrous, Redford countered. As we exit, a stellar body could strike us in the moment of vulnerability. Space is big. Chances of that happening are unlikely even in the middle of a Kalzak Vale. The warp bubble will push away dust particles and small bodies as it always does. The risk is minimal, Jinsho argued. Better take the risk and catch those monsters by surprise, yes? Jinsho is correct, Redford. If our arrival is masked and undetected by our enemies, then we will remain the upper hand, Cynthia commented. It goes against all regulations. Tampering with a navigational AI without destroying it will be a difficult task even for Milcades and the Royal Marines. Not for me, Jinsho jumped on his seat. I can't convince the AI to let me alter it without risk. All I need is permission from Pretty Eyes, he said, turning to Clara. Pretty Eyes? Cynthia exclaimed, outraged. She's a princess, you crass, insolent... Her words died in her throat when Clara raised a hand. Our Ikanti friend may have solved our problem, Cynthia. I believe I can ignore his lack of manners in turn for his kind assistance, Clara proclaimed with a friendly, warm smile. Technician Jinsho, you have full liberty to do what must be needed. Will you require anything as compensation? I can significantly increase your salary or offer up a substantial reward in return. Jinsho shook his head. No need, Pretty Eyes. I do it with gusto. Drazan dead shall be my reward. Hate those things. I can see why Wyatt has taken a liking to him, Cynthia murmured, unheard by everyone but her best friend. We shall discuss rewards if we are to be victorious and survive the coming battle. You will not go unrewarded, Technician Jinsho. Wyatt, I congratulate you for your forward thinking. When we were blinded, you found a solution. Pray to tell what inspired you to make such a move, Clara asked as Cynthia helped her up. An encounter with Salazar Reed. Not to worry, it was a peaceful discussion. It opened my eyes, truth be told, to search for another path. We faced a problem we couldn't solve, so I decided to ask someone who might, Wyatt replied, smiling at Jinsho, who was adoring being the center of attention. Well done, Lieutenant, Redford commented. Wyatt, I will require your attendance after your duty shift is done. Celebrations are in order, and I wish to spend time doing something productive with my hands, Clara commanded. Of course, my princess, Wyatt replied, bowing his head slightly. Moments later, his friends left the room, leaving him with Jinsho and Redford, but not for long. Technician Jinsho, you may return to your duties. I've already authorized a serving of double rations and 2 extra hours of sleep for you as a preliminary reward, said the commander. You can begin your work on the navigational AI after we leave this system. Understood, Commander. I'll be ready, Jinsho saluted before jumping down. Oh, be sure to save telemetry data and video recordings when you put the hurt on the bloody Drazen maniac. Gotta see what else I can improve, declared the avian alien before exiting the room. I repeat, well done, Wyatt. You saved me and Clara much-needed time. She needs time to think and relax after the news we received not too long ago, Redford declared, letting out a frustrated sigh. What happened, sir? Wyatt asked, worried. Someone infiltrated Finnegan Networks and uploaded a video intending to damn and smear the prince's reputation. It frames him as the one responsible for ending the miserable life of Frederick Anderson. Luckily for us, we were able to prevent the video from spreading inside our network, and Lukács Ishtal managed to stop the transmission a third of the way into its runtime, but the damage was done. More than ever, failure is not an option for us. Tell me what I have to do, Commander, Wyatt answered, stoic and serious. Clara needs a friend at her side besides Cynthia and Milcades right now. You will be dismissed for the rest of the day and tomorrow after we're done here. But first, I need you to tell me something. He leaned forth. Tell me everything you can remember about your experience commanding the Navio. Every detail, no matter how insignificant. Wyatt nodded. Gladly, Commander.